Hi there and welcome to another video. This is Jennifer McGuire. So a few weeks ago I shared a video showing how to get a subtle resist background, and it's one of my favorite techniques. Well, today I'm doing a fun spin on that technique in which I do a subtle watercolor wash resist. This technique is super easy and you likely have the products needed to give it a try. I have several examples for you and also some variations and some tips for other techniques along the way. So let's get started with the technique to create a bunch of backgrounds. Here I have a piece of Tim Holtz watercolor paper and I'll be stamping on the smooth side. Any watercolor paper should work. I also have a MISTI stamping tool to help me with my stamping, but you definitely don't need to use one if you prefer not. I'm stamping with Versamark ink, the Simon Says Stamp Stripe Jumble background. You won't be able to see this because it's a clear ink. That's okay, we'll see it in a moment as we add watercolor on top. I did heat set that off screen so that it would be completely dry and disappear. Now I'm pressing 3 colors of Tim Holtz Distress Ink right onto my glass work surface. This is what I'll use as watercolor. I will then lightly mist my paper where we stamped our image and mist our ink on our work surface. So basically we're creating watercolor. Don't use too much water. You really don't need a lot of water for this technique. I'm now picking up the ink with a brush and brushing it back and forth over that stamped image, and you'll see it start to appear. Notice again, I'm not using much water. This is pretty dry. If you use too much water, your image will disappear because the color will sit on top of that Versamark ink instead of resisting it. And there you can see how that Versamark ink somewhat resists that paint that we're putting on top. I didn't heat emboss this. If I wanted that image to be very solid and more perfect looking, I would clear heat emboss it first. But I like the subtle kind of look that you get by using Versamark ink alone as your resist. I decided to make the color a bit darker, so I'm doing a second layer. Notice again, still I'm going light on the water. Then you can heat set that and you have your beautiful watercolor wash resist background. Really quick and easy to do. You could get more creative with your watercolor. I tried to keep mine simple by doing a variation between the Blueprint Sketch, Salty Ocean, and Peacock Feather ink colors. Okay, let's do another example. This time I'm using the new Simon Says Stamp Scallop Wave Stamp. Now I will say that I feel this technique works best with more solid lined stamps. So that last one had some solid lines. This one's a little less solid, so it won't come out as clear, but you'll see it still gives a great result. Now I stamped that with Versamark ink. You really want to get as much Versamark ink down onto your paper as possible. Now I was running out of water, so I have to refill my water bottle. And while I'm doing this, I wanted to mention, I tried this with Distress Oxide ink, and I found it didn't work as well because Distress Oxide inks are not as translucent as the traditional, and you want a translucent watercolor. If you use anything else, you might cover up your Versamark too much. So this time I sprayed my inks and I'm dipping the paper into it, but notice again, I'm not using too much water. Once I'm done, I can dab off the excess ink, and there we have a different look to this technique. I did use lighter colors, and I only did 1 layer, so the pattern of the stamp doesn't show up as much. If I wanted the pattern to show up more, I could have done the brush technique with less water. And I could have used darker colors, but I wanted something that was really bright with that subtle pattern. Okay, and by the way, I do heat set my Versamark ink before I add my watercolor on top. I think it helps a bit, but you could try it without. Okay, here's another variation of the technique. I again stamped with Versamark ink onto watercolor paper. This time I forgot to heat set it and it still worked fine, but I decided to take my ink direct to the paper first. So this time I'm putting 3 different colors of Distress ink directly on top of our stamped image, and you can see how the Versamark immediately does a subtle resist, kind of resists the ink we're putting on top. Next I'm going to take my water bottle and mist this. Now I'm only misting it enough to get the color moving. You don't want to create puddles on there or it really will just hide your image more. I decided to dab off just a little bit of the color and then heat set it. And there you get a more dark look and you can see that pattern popping up. This one will be perfect for an ocean scene background. I could have worked to blend those colors together more, but I really decided only to use those top portions, so I didn't worry about that green on the bottom. So this shows you there are many ways to do this technique, and you just really need to experiment and have fun with it. Okay, now I wanted to show you what happens if you use a lot of water on top of your image. This time off screen, I stamped on watercolor paper the Simon Says stamp You Matter to Me background stamp, which is a favorite of mine, and I stamped it with Versamark ink and heat set it. Now I'm putting a few different colors of distress ink onto my glass work surface and spraying it with a generous amount of water. I'm then taking my background and pressing it in there, and you can see there's more water on this example than the other ones, and I even added more water. What happens here is the Versamark ink looks like it almost absorbs some of the color, so your stamping becomes darker, whereas in the other examples it becomes lighter. It's a very subtle technique, very unique, and I like that it creates kind of this messy, fun background, which we will clean up later with lots of white die cutting. I like that this gives kind of a textured look. It's the only example that I did with a lot of water and watercolor, but I wanted to show you what would happen and how you get different looks. As I mentioned, this technique works best with images that have more solid lines or solid areas. If you use a detailed line stamp, it gets lost. The image gets lost in the color that you add on top. If you want to use a detailed line stamp like this one that I used on this example, I would recommend a different technique, and you're basically kind of faking the look. It gives a more perfect look, so I don't like it as much, but it's definitely another option. So I thought I'd show that here. So I've pressed distress ink onto my glass work surface, added water to my paper and to the ink, and now I'm just brushing it across, and you can use as much water and color as you want here. I did not do any stamping on this watercolor paper beforehand, so we're just starting with the watercolor first. After heat setting this, I decided it was a little too light for me, so I added more color on top. By the way, the colors that I'm using here are picked raspberry, seedless preserves, and wilted violet. If you have regular watercolors on hand, you could definitely use that. Or other dye inks would work for this technique, but I find distress inks are the best. Okay, so after I finish this and I've heat set it and it's completely dry, I'm going to stamp on top of this. This time I'm stamping with Hero Art's Unicorn White Pigment ink. Now this will give a soft white image on top, and I'm really only doing a light layer of it. I didn't stamp my background stamp completely because I want this to give a subtle look. If I wanted it to be bright white and solid, I could have heat embossed it with white powder. But this gives kind of a similar look. It's a little more perfect than the other technique, but it is another great option. So here you can see all the different backgrounds that I created here. All of these I did that watercolor wash resist technique except for that purple one. And I do feel that first example that I did was the best way to do this technique, where we did the jumble stripe background with the blue inks. But I wanted to show you can get lots of different variations with this look, and they're just so much fun to make and quick and easy too. Now that our backgrounds are done, let's go ahead and turn these into cards, and I have lots of tips to share with you here. Let's start with my favorite background, the first one that we created. I decided to keep the focus on the background. I didn't add much else to it, mostly white cardstock. For this one, I used the new Simon Says stamp Sunflower Stem die, which is beautiful, and I used a few times during this video. I die cut it from white cardstock, and I wanted to keep all those little center pieces in, the centers of the petals, so I'm putting some tape on the back so that they stay in place. You could add them back in afterwards, but I felt like this was the easiest way to do it, and there we have one layer of our sunflower. I went ahead and die cut that same sunflower die 3 more times from white cardstock and popped all the little petals out. On the back of each of the die cuts, I'm putting Gina K Connect liquid adhesive, and I'm gluing them all together, so I'm stacking them together for dimension. And then I glued the 3 stacked ones on top of our solid one, the first one that we made. So there you can see that fun layered look that we get in the petals. We get lots of dimension, and the shape of the flower really stands out more. Now check out that vellum piece in the back. It looks like a banner. I wanted to show you how to cut a banner if you don't have a banner die set. Now I'm using a ruler just to make a mark that's halfway across this piece of vellum. So you see that little pencil mark, it's halfway across. And then I'm taking a rectangle die and using the corner. I have the corner lined up with the pencil dot, and then the two sides sticking out from the corner are lined up with the edges of that piece of vellum, or the corners of that piece of vellum. So now I'm going to put a piece of tape there just to make sure that it stays put as we run it through our die cut machine. This will cut that little V shape out of the bottom of our strip of vellum. And by the way, that's a platinum vellum that has some shine to it. Next, let's do that little sentiment strip. I used the new Simon Says Stamp Thanks and Encouragement stamp set, which has 2 large images made up of lots of sentiments. I'm also using the Simon Says Stamp Word Mix 1 die set. And this is 1 die with all those pieces connected that will cut out those sentiments in 1 cut. So let me show you how this works. I'm going to go with one of the sentiments in the first stamp. So I'm stamping that with Altenew Obsidian black ink onto regular white cardstock, and you have bunches of sentiments there. Next, I'm going to take that die that matches up with it and just tape it right in place. It's really easy to line up. And this will cut all of those little sentiments out in 1 cut. Now I have all these little sentiments to add to different cards. I'm going to use one of them on this card and then a couple on future cards in this video. I keep the extras in a bowl so they're ready to use at any time. Okay, so now we have our pieces ready. I am putting adhesive on the back of our sunflower to place that onto the vellum piece, and then adhesive behind that flower on the back of the vellum so that we can glue it to our card. I added little dots of sparkle to the center of our sunflower using a Stardust glitter pen, and this adds some shine and matches nicely with that platinum vellum banner piece. So here's the completed card. You can see how a lot of the background is showing, which I wanted to have, and how I didn't distract too much from that colorful background and kept it clean by adding just the layered white die cuts. I really like this look of lots of white die cutting with a colorful background. Now here's another example using a lot of the same products. I just used different colors of ink on our background. So for this background, I used Salty Ocean Distress Ink, Lucky Clover, and Peacock Feathers. I used another one of the sentiment strips from that same Thanks and Encouragement stamp set. And so you can see how cutting a bunch of those sentiments at once can be a huge time saver. For my next example, I wanted a smaller flower die cut, so I used the Simon Says Stamp Daisy Stem. I like that these have lots of detail to them. Now I have my completed card here and realized I had little ink boo-boos, so I'm using my Couture Creations Creative Detailer tool to sand away or erase away those boo-boos. I use that thing on almost all of my cards. I make a lot of little ink mistakes and it's a lifesaver. So back to the card, you can see here how I did the layered technique with the daisy and added some of the Stardust glitter to it just for some sparkle. Now that Love You sentiment is from the new Simon Says Stamp Clean Line Everyday stamp set, which I'll use several times throughout this video. I really like that the images are very thin line, gives a really classy look. Okay, let's move on to the next example here. I had a small, light, subtle watercolor wash resist piece that I wanted to use, and I thought it was perfect to use with the die cut frame. This time I used the Simon Says Stamp Carnation frame die. I've used lots of different dies like this in the past. I really like them. I think it gives a nice clean look on a card, and it's a quick way to make a simple design. So I'm using that die and I'm cutting it directly from our watercolor wash resist piece using my die cutting machine. And then I'm going to cut the same die 3 or 4 times from regular white cardstock. Now I'm gluing the white die cuts together, doing this again so I get a stacked look. It gives lots of dimension. You could skip and just do 1 layer, but I'm telling you, it looks so much better to layer a few together, and it doesn't take that much more time. So once I have 3 of them glued together, I'm going to add this to a piece of white cardstock. So I'm just putting adhesive on the back of the stacked die cut and putting it onto white cardstock right in the corner. We'll cut off the extra later. Now I'm taking the pieces out of the center of our blue die cut and gluing them in place. So this is a die cut inlay technique. If I wanted to, I could have not cut my blue piece and just glued the stacked white die cuts on top. However, by doing it this way, I'll end up with a blue frame die cut piece that I can use on another card. So it's completely an option, and I'll show you the other version later on in this video. I like to do this die cut inlay technique. I feel like it's putting together a puzzle, which is one of my favorite things to do. And it's really easy with simple die cuts like this that don't have that many pieces. But now we're ending up with that blue frame piece over there on the left that we can use on another card. Okay, so once I have all the pieces glued in place, I trimmed off the extra white cardstock on the top and the side there, and then we can add it to a note card. Now the note card I wanted to add a little bit of interest to, so I stamped the same Simon Says Stamp Jumble Stripe background stamp with Versamark ink onto a white note card. And I heat embossed it this time with white satin pearl embossing powder from Hero Arts, which is a favorite of mine. It's a pearly embossing powder that gives a metallic look to whatever color is behind it. So in this case, it gives like a white, pearly metallic look on top of the white note card. It's subtle, but it adds quite a bit of interest in real life to the simple card. I then white heat embossed You Are In My Thoughts from that same stamp set that I used on the last card. I'll be reaching for this one a lot. And by the way, I did stamp all my envelopes. You may have noticed that. I'll show you that stamp set later. Okay, let's move on to this example, which is another favorite of mine because I don't normally use these colors and I just think they're so bright and cheerful. This is the Simon Says Stamp Sunflower Frame Die, very similar style to the last one, but this time with the sunflower. For the sentiment on this card, I use the Simon Says Stamp Greeting Mix 1 stamp set. This has lots of great unique styled greetings, and this is the set that I used on my envelopes today. I really like the sentiment that said, "You are everything wonderful." So on my card, I white heat embossed that for a really subtle sentiment look. Instead of doing black, I thought it'd be fun to do white. And that is Simon Says Stamp Fog cardstock, which is a soft gray cardstock that works great with bright colored cards. There you can see I did the same technique as I did on the last one, and I filled in that frame die cut with those colorful orange pieces. I like how bright this is, so I'm definitely going to be making more of these, and I have my leftover orange frame to use on another card. Okay, my next example has a little ocean theme, which is always a favorite of mine. This features the My Favorite Things Underwater Scene die set. So you get that frame and the little fish that you can add inside. I die cut the frame and the fish 3 times from white cardstock and glued them on top of each other for a stacked look. This time I did not die cut my colored background. Instead, I'm just going to glue the stacked die cuts on top. By the way, you can see up there on the top the leftover yellow frame die cut that we got when we did the inlay technique. So there are the 2 options. Gluing the stacked die cut on top of the solid background is faster, but you don't end up with the colorful frame. Okay, so once I have all that assembled and trimmed off the excess, I added it to a note card where I used the Avery Elle Scalloped Matte die for the background. I love this die cut, and I'm going to actually cover up that oval in the center. But I've used this die many times and it'll definitely be on my favorites list this year. I thought the scallop dots would be perfect to go with this card theme. So now I'm gluing my little scene in the center there, and I'm using my Stardust glitter pen to make little bubbles coming up from the fish. I did go back and put a dot of glossy accents on top of those little glitter bubbles for some dimension. There you can see how all the white die cutting and the layering really allows that colorful background to stand out. Love those colorful backgrounds with lots of white. And that Hi Friend is once again from the Simon Says Stamp Thanks and Encouragement set, where we die cut all those sentiments at once. Okay, here is the card I created where we did lots of watercolor on top of our Versamark, so it gives kind of a textured look. For this one, I used the Memory Box Birds and Blossoms die set. Comes with that frame and the birds. I think this is fun because you could change up the different seasons with this die. So I did the same thing I did with my last example where I backed the stacked white die cut frame with our colorful piece. And then I added an Enjoy the Day stamp sentiment from the Clean Line Everyday stamp set. I put that all onto a 4¼ by 5½ inch Simon Says Stamp Fog note card. And you can see how I also added a few little birds and some little pearls to the center of our flowers. Doing a card design like this is great when you want to spend an afternoon creating fun inky backgrounds or trying new techniques. Then you can use those colorful pieces with the sharp, crisp white die cutting on top. Okay, last but not least, let's use those pieces where I did the white stamping on top. I went for some funky card designs here. I wanted to try something new. So I have my background piece here, and I'm temporarily gluing it kind of wonky on the front of a note card. After I glue it there, I'm trimming off the excess with my scissors. And now I have 2 wonky shaped pieces that I can add to 2 cards. There are many ways I could arrange these on cards, but I thought it'd be fun to do something with a diagonal line for something different. On both of these cards, I used the Simon Says Stamp Cosmo stem die. This is a great one. Love the little details in the petals and at the center of the flower. So I once again die cut them 3 times from white cardstock and glued them together for a stacked look. Now for the note card here, it's Simon Says Stamp Fog cardstock. And I stamped the Simon Says Stamp You Matter to Me background stamp with a light purple ink on top. I thought it'd be fun to do colored ink on that fog cardstock instead of white for something different. This whole card is kind of different for me, but I figure when you have a bunch of backgrounds that you've created, it's great to take 1 or 2 and try something unique, try something new to see if you like it. And I actually liked that colored stamping on that fog cardstock. And by the way, this is the Simon Says Stamp You Matter to Me background stamp that I reach for all the time. It just seems to fit with lots of occasions. And by the way, I stamped the Thinking of You sentiment and then cut the bars off the top and the bottom of it just for a different look. And our last card is super simple. I just used that leftover background piece, matted it with white cardstock, and added it to a Simon Says Stamp Fog note card. I also die cut 3 of the Simon Says Stamp Cosmo stem die cuts and glued them on top of each other for that stacked look, and use my Stardust glitter pens just to make the little details stand out more. So there you have it, a really fun technique to play with and just experiment. You can use many of the products that you already have on hand. If you are interested in the particular things that I use, I do have them linked below in my YouTube description. You can go to my blog for a lot more information. And in the middle are 2 very similar techniques that you can do without watercolor and just with regular inks instead. I appreciate you watching today. I hope you have a wonderful week, and we'll see you very soon.